I can't think of a better example of an artist who has had a crazy generational rise to fame in the last couple of years than Yeat. Besides having accumulated a fan base that is literally so diehard that it is a lyrical theme in his music, he has managed to stand out as one of the most unique artists in the recent 2020 wave of rage rap, which is an impressive feat in of itself considering how many artists view rage as a wash, rinse, repeat formula rather than a own lane to build your wave within. His songs can at times be borderline intoxicating to listen to, and they scratch an itch in terms of sonic identity and sound selection and sound palette and vocal performance that I haven't seen many artists commit to as aggressively. Part of what makes Yeat such a standout artist is not only the vocal performances and his rap style, but also the production choices that he orbits. He's known for being extremely picky with beats in the studio, and it's probably because of the set distinctive characteristics that all of the beats that he picks have. And while there might be similarities in terms of plugin choices and drum files, there are a lot of distinctive sort of adjectives that could be used to describe every Yeat beat if you were to listen to his whole catalog in one go. A lot of which differentiate his production choices quite drastically from the other contemporaries in the rage genre that he operates within. One of the first aspects that I could think of that defines a Yeat beat is how cartoonish the melodies are. A lot of the beats in terms of drum selection and in terms of the melodic composition are extremely bouncy and playful. If you were to take some of the instrumentals from Yeat songs such as Out the Way or Come and Go and put them as the background music behind a show like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends or like any show on the Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon channel, you would notice that it wouldn't feel out of place by any stretch of the imagination. The second characteristic that I found that orbits all of Yeat's beats is brightness. A lot of his beats command just as much textural shine as the vocals themselves do. And you can even see that on a frequency level. Like if you were to literally drag and drop a Yeat song into a digital audio workstation and throw an EQ on it, you would literally see that his synths orbit as much high end, if not more, than the vocal performances themselves. The beat's density comes from tone, it doesn't come from arrangement. And the third characteristic that I saw in a lot of his beats is that there's a gravitation towards digital and synthetic sounds rather than sounds that are more organic. With the exception of songs that very clearly borrow from rock music such as Can't Stop It or Go Again, a lot of his instrument choice is very reminiscent of 80s to 90s analog synthesizers. There are stronger parallels between Yeat's synth choices with people like Gary Newman or Kraftwerk than like your typical rage or trap beat. Benny X told me himself in a conversation with me that he borrows very heavily from techno artists, and particular Gestaffelstein, which is where he got the inspiration for his signature basses that he uses alongside the 808s. And don't get it twisted, I'm not saying that Yeat has never rapped on a typical rage beat before. I mean, a lot of the music during the 4L and Up To Me era was very current in terms of the typical rage sound at the time when it came to the production choice. But as he started evolving stylistically, the DNA in his beats completely shifted. I feel like the lineage behind Yeat beats now is more so electronic and industrial than underground. And one of the other characteristics that I found in a lot of his beats is that the drums are extremely simple. They utilize refrain with a lot of typical stops within the hi-hat patterns or within beat cuts, and the drum racks are usually 4 to 5 sounds and sometimes even less than that. And it's important for a lot of the drums to be as bare bones as they are, because if they were as complex and intricate as the melodies were, there wouldn't be any room for Yeat's vocals. And just like the drums, a lot of simplicity goes into the arrangements. A lot of the breakups of what could be potential monotony come from vocal performances and beat cuts and crazy stutters rather than complete compositional shifts. And obviously there are structural changes in terms of synth sounds being removed and certain sounds being taken out, but for the most part in a lot of his songs, what prevents the songs from becoming super duper repetitive is literally just the crazy performances that he lays down on the beats. Another characteristic that I found is elastic pitch movement. Yeat beats typically have a lot of glide and portamento and synth bends and gliding leads, and that's extremely important to the actual sound itself. A lot of it mirrors Yeat's vocal delivery, and you can tell how much he borrows from the beats because of how much his ad-libs almost sound like a synthesizer themselves, and how his ad-libs and the synthesizers almost sound like they're mimicking each other. So if you combine all of those different factors into one beat, that's how Yeat's beats are made, and that's what he looks for. So with all that being said, I'm gonna go crack open FL, I'm gonna play a Yeat beat that I made, or at least a beat that I feel like Yeat would get on if he heard it, and break it down and show all the sounds, and we'll go from there. Let's get it. What's up, everybody? I just speed ran a Yeat beat based off of the characteristics that we talked about earlier in the video. I'm going to break down every single sound, every single synth, every single drum, everything. And we'll go from there and see what we came up with. that's the beat as it stands. I'm gonna break down the sounds that went into it and break down the different parts of arrangement so we can see how this beat came together super duper well. So the first sound that I came up with was this pluck, and the preset is Pluck Hitty, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. I'll be putting the link in the description. And this was the melody that I came up with. Keep in mind, on a lot of these beats, the whole point is for them to be bouncy and playful, so that was kind of the feel I was going for. The second sound that I added was another pluck to counter everything else, and the preset was called Pad Relapse, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 1. This is the melody that we currently have right now. I feel like those little glitchy attack elements really kind of helped it stand out, and the way that I did that was by taking the one shot and stretching it so that it remained at the same tempo as when it was initially recorded, and then all I did was just change the sample start time so that you get that little thing right there. The second sound that I added was just the same pluck, just an octave down, and you can hear it in the chorus where it changes, and it's again the same preset, same everything, just shifted one down. Another tip that I like to tell people if you're using one-shots, especially the one-shots that come out of my kit, is to mess with the ring modulation frequencies, because you can get to change the same sounds and turn them into something completely different. So this is what the pad initially sounded like. And when I mess with the ring modulation and just turn it to 52%, it sounds like this. You can do a lot with the pre-computed effects in FL for sure. The second sound that I added was just a saw. My goal was just to find something really, really weird and quirky and just kind of like it stands out on its own super duper well, but it doesn't take too much away from everything else going on. The preset is called Pluck Skate Wheel, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. Nothing too crazy. I didn't even change the envelopes on this. I literally just changed the sample start time so that it just got rid of the whole little boing kind of sound, because I felt like it was just too much considering how fast tempo the beat is. So I just felt like it was going to be a little bit more cohesive. The second sound that I added was another one shot out of my one shot kits. The pad is called Pad Mellow. And the reason it sounds that way is because I turned it into an arpeggiator using the little wrench tool over here and messing around with the settings. I changed the arpeggio time and just messed with the range and changed the setting to up down. Essentially used it in order to change it from just like a normal pad where it would sound like this to something that was a little bit more engaging and just like playful, you know what I mean? The melody that I came up with was this. It's just kind of a, you know, a little weird texture sound. The second sound that we have is the same arp, just changed an octave. I feel like a very slept on thing in production is simply changing the octaves of certain sounds and shifting it up and down in order to indicate a change in arrangement, rather than just like indicating arrangement by adding or removing sounds, because it keeps everything sounding full while differentiating one part of the song to another. The second sound that I added was a lead. The lead was synth hovering, and that's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3, and this is what we currently got. As we talked about earlier in the video, Portamento slides is a pretty big component of a lot of the beats that he uses, so I went over the little wrench channel, I turned on the monophonic mode, and just messed with the Portamento time, and that was kind of how I was able to not only get it to slide, but then I would put these little random mini notes higher in the piano roll to kind of do this little... It's hard to explain when you're playing it like that, but if you hear it in context, kind of adds a little like percussive feel to it. The second sound that we added was a synth brass. It's a very dry and normal sounding synth brass from like an 80s sounding thing, which is kind of what we were going for. The preset is Brass Go To, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. I didn't do anything to it other than just make it so that the release time was 0. That way the moment a key stops playing, it cuts out. That way sounds don't overlap. The next sound that we added was a key, and the key is just key horns shortened, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. I didn't do anything to it. I didn't add any effects to it. I didn't even use the cut self. I literally just let all the different parts bleed into each other, because if you look at the one shot itself, you'll see it kind of trails out and actually increases in volume during the trail in terms of like the ambience that sets off. So my logic was if I was to let those different components overlap one another, it would sound fuller. And this is the melody that I created. See what I mean when I said, like, you know, those little parts overlapping each other? It's kind of tight. The next sound that I added was a chord. The synth is Synth Evil Drone, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. Nothing too crazy on this one. I didn't mess with any effects. All I did was just, you know, make the release time 0 so that it wouldn't overlap with each other, and this is all it does. Kind of sounds like the world's about to self-destruct, but like in a good way. The next sound was again another chord. The preset was Synth Preset Low. The preset was Synth Low, and it's out of my One Shot Kit Volume 3. I changed the mode from resample to stretch. That way every single note would play at the same time, and then I messed with the multiplier in order to kind of tighten up how it is the notes engage with one another in terms of speed. The only thing that I did really to make this sound a little bit cooler is I put on the portamento and I turned the slide up. That way it kind of has those little glitchy components as opposed to sounding like this. You know what I mean? I kind of wanted it to sound that little glitchy slide. The second sound that I added was a synth bass. It literally just goes off every now and then. It's a little tip that I tell producers if you're not trying to go through all this effort of doing the whole volume thing over here. You can literally just go over to the wrench tool and click cut self instead of having to mess around with all this different envelope stuff on the volume here. And when you want the sound to stop playing, you simply put one note where you want it to stop playing and then take the velocity all the way down. That way it immediately cuts out. And with everything else in context, the bass sounds like this. This is a cool little weird little futuristic sound, you know? And speaking of 808s and synth bass, this is another one of those beats where I layered one bass on top of another along with an 808, which is, you know, kind of wild because it's like you never really hear like two different synth basses plus an 808, but that's what I was able to come up with, and I'll play that pattern here. So if you can hear, the moment the 808 started playing, the synth bass bassy frequencies turned all the way up. And the reason why is because of how it is I got them to sound good together. So any producer who's tried layering an 808 with a synth bass knows that it's relatively impossible unless you do some sort of surgical operation level EQing. But there's a way in order to kind of make it a little bit easier, and it's side shading. So I use a plugin called Track Spacer. I put Track Spacer on the synth bass and then went to the 808 and then clicked over here and clicked sidechain to this track. And when I went over to Track Spacer, I went down to the processing tab, and then on the sound changing index I right clicked and then clicked 808, and then when I went over here, all I did was just take this knob over here and turn it all the way over to like the 200 hertz range, which is typically the sub bass frequencies, that, and turn the amount and the ratio all the way up. And then I went over to the settings and then turned the attack and release all the way down. That way every time the 808 hits, these sub frequencies completely cut out. I feel like it added a little bit more texture and a little cool of a tone and a more unique feeling rather than just leaving an 808 by itself. Now, in terms of everything else, here's the hi-hat pattern. It's not a typical two-step. All I did was just have the two-step, and then I took certain notes out, and then I would just kind of leave them a little bit more staggered and a little bit more broken up, and we hear that a lot of it. As you can see, I didn't do the typical two-step pattern. I initially clicked two-step, and then I removed certain notes in order to kind of add pauses, because we hear that a lot of his production where refrain is such a big element of what helps the bounce move forward. And I almost use that second hi-hat sound as a percussion sound, where I would essentially have it at lower notes than everything else, and just kind of add a little bit more texture to it. The next sound is a hi-hat. It's just an open hat. It's nothing crazy. It doesn't do anything super wild. It's literally just kind of there. The next sound is just a snare, and I'll layer it with the other snare so you can hear both of them at the same time. This is the first snare. This is the second snare. I kind of tried to pick the dry snares that I possibly could, because in beats like this, there's so much emphasis on brightness rather than ambience. So I tried my best to just kind of find like the quickest snare. You know what I mean? The snare that just like, it starts and then it just ends super fast. And then the second sound is just the kick. It's the rack kick. It's nothing complex, and it literally just follows the 808s. When you put everything together, you get this. And although I can't exactly play it for you, but I can explain it conceptually, because otherwise I would have to play the beat in full. And as we talked about earlier in the video, a lot of the changes in terms of structural arrangement comes from his vocal performance rather than the beats themselves. And while I can't play it because it would require me to play the entirety of the video, I can show you that structurally on the computer, where if you look from the start to the finish time, after the 8-bar intro, the drums never change, and there are plenty of elements within this entire beat that stay constant throughout. The only real time that things change are, you know, during the verse sections, where I kind of add and remove a couple things here and there, or maybe change an octave here and there. And that's kind of part of what ties it all together. So there you have it, folks. That's my attempt at trying to make a beat that I feel like Yeat would rap on if I was in a studio session with him and played him some stuff. And these are the characteristics that I feel like Yeat looks for in his beats. Feel free to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and I'll be putting the link to all of my one-shot kits and all of my sounds in the description below, along with my Instagram. Let's go.